Hey guys, so I know we're all waiting for that ban list around the corner, but in the meantime, as usual, I wanted to provide a staple tier list of the best hand traps as well as board breakers in the current format based on some topping information as well as some DB data as well, just in case you have some events coming up in this next weekend. As always, definitely go check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles as well as supplies. You can find all of that in the description below. Also want to highlight YGOProduct.com as usual. I'm actually using their top cards data for the first time as part of this video as well, so definitely go check out that website if you haven't already. Alright, so let's just get to the staple tier list for this month, and I think I'm just going to breeze through a lot of these cards just because, context-wise, I don't think much has really changed in the last month or so. Realistically, we've been in kind of the same format with just like Fiendsmith kind of added on top of it, and Snake Eye is still the best. So for example, you have like Ash, Imperm, Nibiru at number, like the top three. Like realistically, you're going to see this as the most common hand traps that you're going to see in most formats, especially nowadays when you have just so many hand traps being played by most meta decks. You have Bishios being pretty popular on top of, let's say, for example, like the Fiendsmith stuff adds more Bishios target for people to still be siding this, and then you also have Tenpai to boot, where they may just actually play Bishio Magma, not even like Druid Swarm or anything, just for the sake of being able to add a dragon in the end phase. So you are still seeing quite a lot of Bishios around, and then Effect Failure to round out like kind of like this A category, which actually happens to be all hand traps this time around. Usually you have like a mix of hand traps or board breakers, but it is a pretty heavy hand trap format. And then speaking of hand traps, that means, with talents, it's going to be popular too, because you are just going to be able to punish your opponent extra hard. And then going second, it's going to be, of course, very impactful and pretty much always live. And stealing an Elusive, for example, is kind of nice, so you can protect yourself from your opponent's hand traps. And then you have Cosmic Cyclone, which has been popular for the last little while. I mean, again, Snake Eye, whether you, let's say, for example, banish like the IP in the spell trap zone, or I believe also with like Fiendsmith stuff like the Desiree or whatever the equip is, if you also get rid of that, I don't think they get to negate. I need to actually read up on that. And then also, let's say like Yubel, they have tons of stuff that you can cosmic away as well, not to mention Tenpai, might be like the difference in not actually surviving by getting rid of their field spell. So really strong, and also kind of flexible, being able to go first or second, which is kind of nice, especially for something when you're going against or when you're playing Tenpai yourself, when you're not really sure if they're going to make you go first or second. For example, Perlia, this is of course one of the newer additions to this tier list now, because it's a new hand trap that kind of got introduced in Infinite Forbidden. So I do think it's fair that it's sort of in this second level of category tier, just because it was not actually like a guaranteed card that it's being played in the topping deck list. Right from the NAWCQ, if they were playing it, they were mostly side decking it. Now, of course, once that new Old Charming card comes out, it was called like Fuwaros, I think, rough translation. That I believe will be pretty much a mainstay in pretty much everyone's deck, as long as it is affordable, which is probably not going to be for the first little while, but nonetheless, still a pretty strong card, and definitely not looking forward to when the new one drops. And speaking of that new Mold Charming card, we're also going to be seeing cross out a lot more, I'm sure, once that rolls around with Rage of the Abyss, and along with something like Ash, basically kind of like what you see in like OCG when Maxi is legal. Cross out, as actually, speaking of this, you should also check out my banlist prediction survey video that I did recently. This is definitely one of the more hot topics in terms of, will it get hit now? I believe it's hit in the OCG, and of course it's kind of like similar-ish argument with like, let's say, Call by the Grave, where just going first, these meta decks just end up being a lot stronger than they already are when they can stop your hand traps as well. And then you have something like Feather Duster, Call by, nothing too much to say about that. They're just generic one-offs that you're probably playing. Skill Drain, it's sad to see that it's scored this high, because usually, obviously, if your deck could play it leading up until, this format or whatever years ago, it was always a strong card, but, it was just a card that most decks wouldn't be able to play. Usually you would see in like Floodgate decks for the most part, or at least some decks, let's say, like Branded has shown, or even Tier Limit sometimes in like the first iteration, where if they can put up big bodies, they would play it, but really it wasn't being played enough to actually get scored that high. But nowadays, just so many decks just run this. I mean, even like Snake Eye, just any deck where realistically, if they get hit by Skill Drain, they would actually suffer. But as long as they get to go first, it's going to be strong. So it is still seeing a lot of play. Hopefully it does get, at the very least, get put back to 1. This one was a little surprising because it was Ghost Ogre and Droll just narrowly losing that spot to it. So Droll, on one hand, entering the NAWCQ, which of course is like the first event post Infinite Forbidden. A lot of people were playing Droll, right? You would have seen that in my NAWCQ Top Cup breakdown. You kind of see this a lot with Droll. It's very format dependent, especially when you're about to enter kind of like a high level event, when a new set drops, or let's say a new balance is just about to go into effect. You're kind of like cautious about it and play Droll, and then you kind of slowly see it decline a lot in play right afterwards. So it really goes up and down a lot. Ghost Ogre is interesting because, I mean, I guess, let's say against Tenpai, if they have to use a field spell effect to search, yes, of course, it's very impactful. Against Yubel, definitely comes up as well. Against Snake Eye, I didn't think it was actually that impactful. I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong. My friend Vincent did tell me that, you know what, you could use it on, let's say, like Desiree when it tries to negate Promethean Princess to, like, prevent them from being Firelock, for example. I guess that's kind of a cool interaction. I'm sure there's also, like, the field spell you could hit, which is a little bit situational, I'm sure. But nonetheless, I mean, these are some hand traps that are still seeing some play right now. So now moving on to the next tier, we do have Lightning Storm. So in terms of clearing back row, obviously very strong, still pretty good. And you have a lot of Tenpai topping right now, and they're going to be playing something like this, Feather Duster, even like a lot of Dark Hole Regeki, those kind of like very big board wipe cards. But in terms of getting rid of monsters though, I'm finding it's not that impactful right now, just because aside from Link monsters, obviously, you know, they're usually summoning everything in defense mode right now. So for that respect, maybe not as great. Droplet, really good for monster negation and better than Dark Ruler for most part, and at least just the way it's working right now, because let's say Desiree, as long as they have like a quick play spell that they set, or let's say they're playing Yubel, they have like the Unchained Trap that they can chain and then use Desiree to negate the Dark Ruler. Droplet can be a little bit better in that respect, as long as you are a deck that can afford to, you know, send some cards as part of cost. Then you have D-Barrier. Even though you've seen a big decline in something like Voiceless Voice, Branded, where D-Barrier really hits hard as well, just because of, let's say, like Tenpai, you know, you really have to ensure that you survive, and D-Barrier is going to be one of those cards that can almost guarantee that, right? So that is good. Again, something like Fiendsmith stuff, Calling Fusion can at least do something, so it is unfortunately still around. You have something like D-Shifter, which is a very controversial card to say the least. Will it finally get hit in the TCG? Hopefully. It is definitely problematic with, you know, a lot of decks requiring Graveyard. Very strong against Snake Eye, which is why you're seeing decks like, let's say, Ritual Beasts have been doing quite well, and they have a lot of Floodgate-like effects that they have access to. Aside from Shifter, they could end on, let's say, Colossus, or let's say Protos, or even like Baguska is still something. So, you know, Shifter, and of course you can't forget something like Cashier or Floandries, which of course at the WCQ level we're not doing that well, but you know, they do still exist. And Tenpai, of course, they are also playing something like Shifter. So we spoke a little bit earlier about Dark Coolers, so, you know, on its own, probably not going to be that great just because it's going to get negated, but you know what, funnily enough, Dark Cooler normal, it's actually not once per turn, which for the most part never really mattered because, you know, whenever you played it, almost always it was resolving. But nowadays, if you draw multiple copies against like a Snake Eye board, honestly, it can actually do some stuff at least, so it would be nice if it actually resolved. And then you have Phantasme, so this was seeing some play along with Perlia and some of those topping lists, at least at the NAWCQ when I was breaking that down. I guess they wanted to potentially like draw into this off of Perlia and then draw even more and kind of fix your hand a little bit more, because obviously you can't really do it the other way around. And also, as long as any deck's playing like Fiendsmith stuff, you know, they're always going to have some kind of link plays, and Phantasme definitely still live in most parts. And then you have Ghost Spawner. I mean, really goes along the lines of like Imperm, Veiler, just like Monster Negation. Hand Traps, pretty popular right now. And the Burn effect is kind of nice too, where kind of going into time is kind of a big thing right now, especially with like Lacrima Burn. So it might actually put some pressure. Evenly matched. On one hand, it is a great card if it can resolve, right? If you can think about like the Snake Eye board, or let's say like the Yubel board, you know, if the evenly resolves, that's pretty big. Of course, the problem is they're going to be able to negate it, and just sacrificing the battle phase, really hard to give up. And then you also have a lot of Tenpai topping, and they're obviously not playing evenly because it goes against the whole purpose of an OTK deck, which is also just bringing down the score for evenly match as well. But you know what? If it can resolve, I think it's great. And then finally, we have something like Rivalry. Unfortunately, on YGScope for Dueling Book data, it didn't seem to have any for this month for some reason. So, you know, if your deck can play it, obviously very strong, especially right now against something like Snake Eye. This is one of the cards that people are also saying, you know, will it get banned? I mean, it's a little bit tricky. At least it got limited, but you have something like, let's say, like There Can Be Only One, goes a match. I think if they're going to ban this, they would have to kind of ban all of them, I feel like, just because, you know, the format will always flip. There's going to be some new meta deck that's announced that will actually be like all of the same type, which is pretty common, really, historically speaking. And then maybe There Can Be Only One becomes better in that respect, and then no one will care about Rivalry at that point. So, you know what? I think it'll kind of flip back and forth. Will they ever ban it? I don't think it's out of the question, but I'm not sure about right now. And then we have Thrust, which, you know, for the past year or so, I would say the play of this card has definitely gone down quite a lot, especially if you compare it to last year's NAWCQ, where like setting Eradicator was very big. But you know what, even now you still have some utility, right? Like D-Barrier, you have something like the Daruma Cannon, which is pretty popular too. And then something like the Black Oat Laughs is another new addition. You could technically set off Thrust. I'm not sure if you'd rather kind of dump it into the graveyard instead for that effect. There's, you know, it's actually pretty cool card, and kind of cool that we are seeing some more normal traps see more play that are not really really floodgate-ish, like something like D-Barrier, for example. Alright guys, so that was it for the staple tier list by the data for this month. Hopefully you found that a little bit helpful in terms of preparing your list for whatever events you may have coming up this weekend. So of course, once this ban list gets announced, a lot of the cards on this tier list probably will get shifted around a lot. I do look forward to whatever the ban list may be. Hopefully it's a huge one, and definitely let me know your thoughts on what you hope will change. Anyways, definitely a big thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors for the continued support as always, and well, take care guys.